All right, hello everybody. I'd like to thank you all for inviting me here for the Global Bitcoin Conference, and to thank Sunny and the rest of the Global Bitcoin Conference crew for allowing me to talk. India's been absolutely fabulous. It's my first time here, and I really enjoy it. So I'm here to talk about Bitcoin mining and what the future might hold for that, and what there's many facets to Bitcoin mining, and a lot of people don't understand it. Okay, so just before we talk about Bitcoin mining, we need to talk about some of the basics and where Bitcoin mining comes from. I like to start off with different kinds of currencies. And in this particular instance, we're talking about deflationary and inflationary currencies. In an inflationary currency, such as US dollars or British pounds, or pretty much any fiat currency, you're able to print as much money as you want. Now, this has the effect of devaluing the currency as time goes along. What your dollar or your rupee or your pound is worth today, it will be worth less tomorrow. So you're encouraged to spend it. With Bitcoin, it's a deflationary currency. There's only a limited amount of money that can be printed. In this case, 21 million is the total amount. There's actually about 12 million already created, and we estimate there's about 40% of that in circulation. Going forward, once we reach 21 million, or just under 21 million, in about the year 2142, so a little over 100 years from now, there will be, again, about 40% of the Bitcoins in circulation. That's through attrition. You lose your wallet key, or the people, for example, Satoshi's wallet, the very first wallet, has almost 1 million Bitcoins in it. So that's most likely 1 million Bitcoins that will never be spent. So we've gone from 21 million to 20 million Bitcoins available. And as time goes along, people will lose access to their wallets and to their money. So not only is it deflationary, not only is there a limited supply, but as money gets destroyed, it's never replaced. So your Bitcoin today is going to be worth more tomorrow. That's really one of the fundamental underpinnings of inflationary and deflationary currencies. So Bitcoin, let's talk about divisibility versus fiat currency and Bitcoin. You can only divide fiat currencies currently roughly into 1/100th of the base unit. And that's 1 penny for US dollars. For various other currencies, it's called something else, but it's 1/100th of the base unit. Nothing can cost less than 1 penny. Now you're saying, well, yes it can, of course it can. You have to go to another system. You're not using the fiat system anymore. You're using a ledger. You're using a barter system. You're using an IOU system where you say, this person owes me less than 1 penny. But if we're talking about the currency, where I have a penny, or I have a dollar, or I have the physical coin, you can't divide it in less than 1/100th of the currency. In Bitcoin, you can divide it into 1/100 millionth. This is called a Satoshi. And with Bitcoin being deflationary, as I said earlier, your Bitcoins will be worth more tomorrow than they are today. It's very unlikely anything is ever going to cost less than 1 Satoshi. In the advent that it does, let's say Bitcoin just absolutely explodes, becomes the world currency, and each Bitcoin is worth $10 million a piece. 1 Satoshi is going to be fairly valuable. We can trivially increase the decimal places from 8 to 16. That's giving it 1/10 quadrillionth of the base currency. And if anything ever costs less than that, we are in a totally different world in terms of monetary. So, as an example of this, I like to try to illustrate that. You have Bob, the chicken vendor. He sells chickens. On Monday, Alice comes in. She wants to buy a chicken. The chicken costs 5 cents. That's no problem. Alice gives Bob 5 cents, and Bob's happy, Alice is happy, she walks away with a chicken. On Tuesday, she comes in, she wants to buy another chicken. It costs 2 cents because of inflation, or deflation in case of the currency. It costs 2 cents, no problem. Alice can give Bob 2 cents, and everyone's happy. Alice walks away with the chicken, Bob has his money. On Wednesday, the chicken's only worth 1 cent. Again, we don't have any problem. Alice pays Bob 1 cent, everyone's happy. On Thursday, the chicken is only worth half a cent. So what happens then? Alice can't pay Bob half a cent because half a cent doesn't exist. So they have to go to a barter system, or they have to go to a ledger. Bob writes down in his notebook that he owes Alice half a cent, and he gives her a chicken. Or Alice takes 2 chickens, and she has an extra chicken and doesn't know what to do with it. That's a problem. What if Alice wants to go to Sally the next day, and she wants to buy a chicken from Sally? She has to pay again half a cent, and Sally owes her half a cent. So now Bob and Sally owe Alice half a cent. Alice is out a whole cent, and she can't recover it unless she goes back to these vendors. So we've got around this to some degree through electronic ledgers and central authorities in the banking system. We trust them to maintain this ledger that Bob owes me half a cent, or that I have half a cent worth of value in my account. We have to trust them, the central authorities. So that brings me to the central authorities. They are our traditional ledgers. If we don't have a written ledger, they are our traditional ledgers. But Bob, the chicken vendor, he's a ledger. He's a central authority. He is controlling your funds. The banks, they're a central authority. The government, they're a central authority. They all have control over your funds, and they say what you owe or what someone owes you. Someone other than you controls the existence and the flow of your money. As the ledgers grow and the central systems become larger, altering, forging, or counterfeiting them become easier and harder to track. It's chaotic. If you have a huge system, a small change somewhere, it's going to go unnoticed in a lot of cases. That leads to the corruption that you see in a lot of the banking systems. So Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer system, and at least 51% of the network has to agree on what the ledger is and what it says and who owes what and who owes who. It's controlled by everyone because it's on everybody's computer, but it's controlled by no one because it's on everybody's computer, so not any particular individual has control over it. Unlike the traditional ledgers, as the Bitcoin network grows and the ledger becomes larger, it becomes harder to alter. It becomes harder to forge. It becomes harder to counterfeit. That's a security feature. It's built into Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is deflationary and it is divisible. There will only be 21 million Bitcoins produced. As I said, there'll actually be less than that in actual circulation. It can be divided into 1/100 millionth of the base unit. It also addresses the problem of ledger control and divisibility that plague all fiat currencies. Now, as I said, the Bitcoin you have today will be worth more tomorrow. This leads to the problem of hoarding, which we've kind of touched on already, but it's really something that needs its own discussion, and not something I want to discuss here, but it's something we need to be aware of and how to combat it. So Bitcoin is very difficult for people to understand. If you've ever tried to explain Bitcoin to somebody, you know this. You know it's very hard to have them wrap their brain around how it works. They're just goes over most people's heads. Try to explain Bitcoin mining to somebody. That's a whole nother game. It makes explaining Bitcoin trivial. So how does Bitcoin mining work? In Bitcoin mining, you have miners, which are individuals who have computers, or in the current modern day, they have specialized devices, ASIC devices, all around the world. They're everywhere. They're in South America, they're in the US, they're in Africa, India, Russia, the UK, they're everywhere. And what they do, they have these devices that compute the transactions that have happened over the course of the past 10 minutes. So Bitcoin mining is really transaction processing. And it's also known as transaction clearing if you are perhaps Visa or some other traditional network. That's all it is. That's all it does. It processes the transactions. It's not mysterious. The process to do that may be mysterious, but the actual act of mining is transaction processing. And how that happens is with the blockchain. So the blockchain, trying to explain that to people is somewhat difficult, but I'll try here. So we have a block. And you take the transactions that have happened in the last 10 minutes and you try to stuff it in this block. And to do that, you take the value of each transaction, and each transaction will have a different value. You add it to the value of the block. Now each block, each empty block, has its own value. And you take a random number, and you run it through the hash function, the SHA-256 hash function, as we discussed earlier, and out pops another number. All these numbers added together, run through the hash function, out pops another number. And if that number meets or exceeds the value the network is looking for, which is defined by the network difficulty, if it meets or exceeds this value, you've created a new block. Hooray, everyone's happy. If it does not meet or exceed this value, you start the whole process over. Now this happens millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions of times per second on the Bitcoin network currently. And that's all of the miners together. So we create a new block, it gets added to the blockchain, and the whole process starts over. So why would someone do this? This is an expensive process. It takes a lot of time, energy, computing power, and money. You have to purchase the hardware, you have to operate the hardware, you have to house the hardware. It's expensive. So Satoshi developed two incentives to do this. He did this through the block rewards and through transaction fees. The block rewards started at 50 Bitcoins back in 2009, and it halves every 4 years. Last year, in November, it halved to 25 Bitcoins, and in about 4 years from then, a little less because of the network growth, it will halve again to 12.5 Bitcoins. So we have the block reward, but it dwindles. It will dwindle away every 4 years, it will halve. So in about 2020 or 2024, give or take 4 years, it will be very small. You won't be earning much money from block rewards. What Satoshi envisioned to make up for this was the transaction fees. Each transaction that you make, you do not have to, you can attach a transaction fee to it. These fees are entirely voluntary, and they will always be voluntary. But even if they are voluntary, they will be required. This is kind of confusing. People aren't quite sure what to make of this. As we go along, as the Bitcoin network grows and we have more and more transactions, there is a practical limit on the size of a block, meaning you can only stuff so many transactions into a block. Now, this is not a technical limit. A block can be of any size. It can have as many transactions in it as you want. But the practical limit is because of the transmission time of a block. The miners do not want to send blocks that are larger than roughly 1 megabyte, because this introduces an increased probability of what's called an orphan block, where two miners mine the same block at the same time, meaning one will lose. So the miners will lose money if there's an orphan block. They don't want this. So the block size is limited. And that means that you're going to have to compete for space in this block, in the next block. If you want your transaction to be put into the next block, you're going to have to make it enticing for the miners to put your transaction in the next block. You'll do this through the transaction fee. This is a shift that's starting right now. We're starting to see the blocks become too large to include all the transactions